Hello everyone, welcome to African News and Gist, and this is Iyore, and today we're going to be talking about the history of the black people as pertaining to the British colonial rule. Okay, let's just get into it. Locked away in British Foreign Office are files that are tagged secret colonial disturbance. Do not open. The files are all old, they are faded, but in them contains the truth of how British has oppressed the blacks for hundreds of years and that they do not want the world to know about. The same empire, the British Empire, that claimed to have brought civilization to Africa were running concentration camps all around Africa. The same people that claimed to have brought Christianity were the exact same people that were busy buying and selling human beings across Africa. And the same government that claimed to be the mother of democracy were busy across Africa, stealing resources, killing hundreds of people, enforcing racist agenda just so they could enrich themselves. For hundreds of years, black people in the Caribbean, Africa, and even in Britain lived under an empire that treated their pain as the cost of progress. From Jamaica's sugar plantations to Ghana gold mines, from Kenya's torture camps to Nigeria's oil conflicts, the British Empire wasn't a force for good. It was a machine built to steal resources and to destroy the lives of black people. But here's the question: how did Britain hide all of this? How did a country that ruled a quarter of the world convince its people that those it oppressed were lucky and not victims? What secrets did Britain hide in those black oppression files? And why is it still afraid of what the world might uncover? In this video, we are going to find out everything that there is to uncover. Before British ruled the oceans, it ruled the slave ships. The transatlantic slave trade wasn't a mistake or a lapse in morals. It was the very foundation on which the British Empire was built. From the late 1500s, money, not morality, guided British policy. London's bankers and traders realized quickly that enslaving human beings made them more money than gold or silver could ever do. Between the 1500s and 1800s, over 3 million Africans were forced onto British ships. Only about 2.7 million survived the brutal journey. The rest were thrown into the sea, treated as lost cargo, their debts reduced to insurance paperwork. The British system called this the triangular trade. The British system called this the triangular trade. This was when ships from Liverpool, Bristol, would ship items like guns, alcohol, clothes down to Africa in exchange for human beings. These people that were exchanged in Africa in the place of clothes, alcohols, and guns were then transported through the Atlantic and sold in the Caribbean in exchange for sugar, cotton, and rum. This ship then returned to England from the Caribbeans, filled with products like cotton, sugar, and rum, which then boosted the economy of England. What school book often describes as clever trade was actually a mass dehumanization of the black race. On the slave ships, men and women were chained so tightly together that they could barely breathe in the dark. Children died in their mothers' arms. At night, sailors abused the women they held captive. Diseases spread quickly, turning every trip into a floating graveyard. With each voyage, investors grew richer while the value of a black life was reduced to almost nothing. When Britain finally ended slave trade in 1833, freedom did not come actually. What happened was that the chains just changed hands. The government borrowed what would today be around 20 billion pounds to pay slave owners for their losses. The people who had been enslaved got nothing. No money, no land, no apology, not even recognition. Even more shocking, those debts were only fully paid off in 2015, meaning that for generations, ordinary British citizens, including the descendants of enslaved Africans, were unknowingly helping to repay the money given to the former slave owners. Truthfully speaking, the slave trade did not really end. It just only changed form. It metamorphosed into credit, banking, and inherited wealth. The money made by Britain for selling Africans was instrumental during the Britain Industrial Revolution. Even today, the names of slave traders are still seen on London's buildings, tied to its banks, and carried in the family lines of Britain's elites. And when the slave ships could no longer sail without political backlash, Britain found new ways to continue exploitation. That mastered the formula: dehumanize people, take their resources, and call it progress. From the slave ships of the Atlantic, the empire's hunger shifted to the land, especially the Caribbean island, which became the sugar-filled center of Britain's wealth. To understand how Britain became rich, imagine Jamaica's sugar fields at midday, the air thick with smoke, the ground covered in ash, and the sound of whips cutting through the sad songs of the enslaved. This was the true source of Britain's power. The Caribbean's plantation system, death camps disguised as paradise. This was the true source of Britain's power. The Caribbean plantation system, death camps disguised as paradise. By the early 1700s, the Caribbean was producing over 100,000 tons of sugar every year, enough to make Europe addicted to sweet tea. But every ton of sugar came at the cost of an African life. In Jamaica, an enslaved person lived on average only 7 years. Plantation owners found it cheaper to buy new people than to care for those who were sick or tired. Their business model was cruel but simple: treat life as an expense and death as a loss on paper. Men worked swinging machetes from sunrise to sunset until their backs were covered in scars that looked like the sugar cane itself. Women carried load heavier than their own children and were whipped if they fell. Pregnant women were forced to work until they gave birth. Some were even beaten while in labor. Babies born on plantations were branded with the owner's initials before they could even crawl. Britain's sugar was built on pure human suffering. Yet, the plantation owners were treated like heroes when they returned home. Many joined parliament and bought noble titles with the money they made from slavery. Families like the Barclays and Gladstones built massive fortunes that helped create Britain's banks, universities, and cathedrals. They named streets after themselves, but never after the people who died to make them rich. Whenever enslaved Africans fought back, Britain responded with a more brutal force. In 1831, the Baptist War broke out in Jamaica that was spearheaded by Samuel Sharp. All Samuel Sharp demanded was fair pay and freedom of the black people, but the colonial army responded with brutal killings of more people. Over 500 people were executed and their bodies were left hanging on trees to serve as warnings to others that may want to rise up and speak up. Before Samuel Sharp, who spearheaded the Baptist War, was hanged, he said, "I would rather die in the gallows than to live in slavery." Britain labeled him a criminal, but the world saw him as a prophet that stood up and fought for freedom and fair pay. Britain labeled Samuel Sharp as a criminal, but the world saw him as a prophet that stood up to fight for fair pay and for freedom. Samuel Sharp rebellion frightened London that in just after 2 years, the British Slavery Abolition Act was passed. They didn't pass it because they developed conscience, they passed it because the voices began to threaten their profits. Yet, the freedom that came after was just slavery in disguise, the apprenticeship system. This apprenticeship system first freed people to work without pay under the guise of learning responsibility. The plantation economy didn't end, only the words used to describe it changed. While the Caribbean suffered under this new form of freedom, Britain turned its attention back to Africa. This time, the empire wanted raw materials and not sugar. A new wave of black oppression had just begun. When Britain ended the transatlantic slave trade, it praised itself as the world's moral leader. But abolition wasn't about doing the right thing, it was a strategic move. The empire no longer needed to ship Africans across, it could exploit them right at home. This marked the start of colonial slavery, a system that was wrapped and disguised as empire building. Across West Africa, the Union Jack replaced the slave ship as a symbol of exploitation. In Ghana, Britain stole gold that now shines in royal crowns. In Nigeria, they took palm oil, tin, and cocoa-filled British coffers while local farmers were taxed into poverty. In Sierra Leone, a colony supposed for freed slaves, black people were ruled by white governors who denied them basic rights. Colonial cruelty was even worse in East Africa, especially Kenya. By the 1950s, Britain had taken the best farmland, forcing indigenous communities into crowded reserves. When the Kikuyu people rose up in the Mau Mau rebellion, demanding land and freedom, Britain labeled them as extremists. Before I continue further, please tell me, are you enjoying this video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to this channel to watch more videos on African news and gist. Let's continue now. Over 1 million Kenyans were forced into barbed wire camps that the British called protected village. What happened there was as brutal as the worst crimes of the 20th century. Men were castrated with pliers, women were sexually abused with bottles, and the entire village were burned as punishment. Tortures became so common that colonial officers even kept record of broken bones to show how efficient they were. When news of these atrocities reached London, officials didn't deny them. They destroyed the evidence. As Kenya neared independence, the British launched Operation Legacy, burning documents and dumping orders into the Indian Ocean. It wasn't until decades later that the hidden archives surfaced, exposing Britain's labor camps in horrifying details. Historian Caroline Ekins pieced together these nightmares using survivor stories. Her book, The Britain's Gulag, revealed that nearly the entire Kikuyu population had been imprisoned or enslaved in the name of civilization. The British government fought her findings for years, finally expressing regret in 2013 and giving token compensation to a few thousand survivors, less money than it cost to maintain royal palaces that year. But the pain and the suffering of a people cannot be paid for with money. The violence in Kenya wasn't a one-time event. It was the inevitable result of an empire built on oppressing black people. When the guns went quiet, a new weapon took their place: forgetting. And this weapon would prove even more powerful. Even though independence movements pushed out the colonizers, Britain's final conquest was mental and cultural. They were rewriting history. From the 1960s onwards, the empire turned its long record of brutality into a story of progress and kindness. Schools began to teach a sanitized version of histories, and museums displayed stolen artifacts as trophies of discovery. The erasing of history was intentional and thorough. Slavery was made to look like a mistake that Britain had morally corrected. Colonial massacres were called incidents, and uprisings were labeled tribal unrest. The empire was portrayed as a civilizing gift of law and language to a dark and chaotic world. This story reached every classroom, but memory fought back through symbols. In cathedrals and government buildings, the Order of St. Michael and St. George still shows a white angel standing over a black man, a grim symbol of domination. Statues of slave trade still loom over city squares. When people protest to take them down, politicians claim it's erasing history. Yet the truth had already been erased long before any statue fell. Britain's efforts to wipe out black history meant that generations grew up confusing oppression with order. By silencing the past, the empire kept the same power structure alive in new ways, economically, politically, and racially. The empire had found its most effective invention yet, a way to exploit people without appearing to rule them. Meanwhile, Africa became the resource bank for the post-colonial world. British companies, some descended from old colonial trading firms, still dominated mining, oil, and banking across the continent. From Nigeria's oil to South Africa platinum, Ghana's gold to Zambia's copper, these companies extracted wealth, paid very little in taxes, and left behind environmental damage. The flow of profit still went straight from African land to London banks. As the author says, mining conglomerates based in London still control vast tracts of African soil. Independence existed only on paper. In reality, control has shifted from colonial rulers to corporate wards. The empire's influence goes beyond money. The idea that white equals order and black equals chaos, once used to justify slavery, is still part of British institution. In policing, housing, and even jobs, black people are often treated as suspects first before they are treated as individuals, and this reflects the same racial hierarchies that fueled slavery and colonization. The surveillance of black bodies on London streets is like the watchtower of a plantation overseer. Even cultural symbols still keeps this legacy alive. Statues of slave traders still dominate city squares, and honors like the Order of St. Michael and St. George still show a white angel standing on a black man, a disturbing reminder of the empire's arrogance. Today, the empire's power comes from hiding exploitation as corporations. Global capitalism became its new empire, with London at its center. Financial hubs like the City of London and offshore tax haven quietly keeps this invisible empire running, letting Britain profit from global inequality without openly ruling anyone. Where Britons once used chains, they now use contracts. The empire has survived by merely changing its techniques, but not its goals. Whips became interest rates, colonies became markets, and enslaved people became cheap labor. Britain never admitted its crime and never broke the system that built its wealth. Instead, those systems evolved. Even though the Union Jack no longer flies over Africa or the Caribbean, the empire never really ended. It just learned to hide itself. Think about this. If 3 million Africans were trafficked under the British flag, does an apology without restitution mean anything? How can a country call itself civilized when it paid slave owners, not the enslaved, for their suffering? Share your thoughts in the comments. Was the history we were taught written by the people who benefited from slavery and exploitation? If you want to see more videos like this, kindly subscribe to this channel and hit the bell icon. We explore Africa, its history, news and gist, and reveal stories the world should know. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned, stay safe, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.